Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. So today I want to talk about the introduction of relativism. So what is relativism? Actually, relativism has been part of Western philosophy since its beginnings. True, the term itself only came into use in the 19th century. Defining relativism is challenging and it's been interpreted in many ways, applied across ethical, cultural and religious views. At its core, relativism holds that these views should be evaluated within their cultural context, not by any absolute standards. What one group finds true or good may not be so for another. Philosophers like World and Cook offer different perspectives on relativism. World sees it as a mass over nature, suggesting that theorists give a distorted view of reality. Cook defines it as the belief that what we experience has no absolute or universal validity, only relative truth based on perspective. Relativism can be divided into cognitive and ethical types. Cognitive relativism questions universal truths about the world, suggesting that there are only different interpretations. Ethical relativism questions universal moral principles, arguing that what's good or just can vary by context. Today, relativism promotes tolerance, allowing people to live according to their own belief and culture. It encourages skepticism toward universal standards, helping avoid biased judgment about others and raise awareness of ethnocentrism, fostering respect for cultural diversity.
What is concept of relativism? It's a concept with many interpretations, and there's no universally accepted definition. Relativism such as that ethical, cultural, and religious beliefs should be understood with their own context and not judged by a universal standards. So what one culture or person consider true or good may be varied and not the same with the others. Relativism can be divided by two types, which is cognitive and ethical. So cognitive relativism argues that there is no single reality or truth, only different interpretation of the world. Ethical relativism suggests that there are no universal moral principle, and what is good or just varies across culture and context. So let's talk about historical and development of relativism. Relativism first emerged in Western philosophy in 5th century BCE in Greece, introduced by Protagoras of Abdera, a Greek sophist. Unlike Socrates and Plato, who believed in fixed truth, Protagoras argued that man is the measure of all things. In his work, Alya, he claimed that each person's perspective determines their own reality, making truth is individual perception. After Protagoras, relativism faded from view until the Renaissance era, which were until the thinkers like Michel de Montaigne revived it. So Montaigne argued that sensory experience and value judgment are relative, challenging their classical idea of absolute truth. So other thinkers such as Voltaire, Montesquieu, and Hardy in 17th and 18th century, they explore cultural and moral relativism, but they rejected extreme relativism. So in the 19th century, Sir William Hamilton discussed knowledge is relative to human perception and sensory limits. In his understandings towards relativism is that of knowledge that comes from a person perspective and experience which is interrelated with the person's sense of faculty and his physiological apparatus through which they subtle sense things.
I will continue explaining 3 characteristics of relativism, highlighting what makes each unique and providing examples. So let's begin. Number 1, personal morality. Personal morality in relativism means that ideas of right and wrong are shaped by individual or cultural beliefs. There's no absolute standard for morality. What one culture views as ethical may not be the same as another. Example, according to Wong 2006, some cultures accept euthanasia as an acceptable act, while others see it as morally wrong due to religious beliefs. Both are valid under relativism. Characteristic 2, context-based truth. Bahramian and Carter 2015 illustrates that context-based truth emphasizes that the truth depends on the culture or social setting. What's true in one context may not be in another. For example, think of direct eye contact. In some cultures, it shows confidence, while in others, it's seen as disrespectful. Both interpretations are true within their own context. Characteristic 3. Tolerance for different beliefs. Relativism promotes tolerance by supporting the acceptance of diverse beliefs. It argues that no one should impose their values over others. For example, imagine a school with students from various religious backgrounds. One group practices daily prayer, while another does not due to their beliefs. Relativism encourages an environment where each group respects the other's practices without imposing their own beliefs. So this fosters peaceful coexistence and acceptance, even when beliefs differ. So, what's the difference between these three characteristics? Personal morality focuses on subjective definitions and morality, while context-based truths focus on situational truth rather than right or wrong. Tolerance for different beliefs emphasizes more about acceptance and coexistence, it not defining what is true or moral at all. It is noticeable that relativism's focus on personal morality, context-based truth, and tolerance. It emphasizes on diversity and understanding, while these characteristics promote open-mindedness. They can also create challenges like setting moral boundaries.
Throughout history, ideologies have shaped societies, driven movements, and altered the course of nations. Whether through politics, religion, or culture, ideologies have immense power to influence people's lives. First, communism. Take communism, for instance. Advocating for a classless society, it led to major shifts in countries like the Soviet Union and China. In the USSR, Lenin and Stalin imposed state control, but at great human cost, purged forced labor and famine. Similarly, in China, Mao's policies like the Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution caused widespread suffering, all in the name of building a communist society. Second, fascism. With its focus on nationalisms and authoritarian rule, left its mark in Nazi Germany, where Hitler's regime led to the Holocaust and World War II. Mussolini's Italy also embodied fascist principles, pursuing military expansion and state control. Third, liberalism. In contrast, liberalism champions democracy, individual rights, and free markets. It's been the foundation of many Western democracies like the United States and France, inspiring civil rights movements and global institutions like the UN. Fourth, Islamism. Islamism focused on implementing Sharia law has shaped political landscapes in places like Iran and Afghanistan. The Iranian Revolution of 1979 created a theocratic state, while the Taliban's rule in Afghanistan and enforced strict interpretation of Islamic law. Fifth, nationalism. The belief in the sovereignty and identity of a nation has driven independence movements like India's fight against British colonial rule led by Gandhi. It also played a key role in events like Brexit and the violent breakup of Yugoslavia. And finally, environmentalism. Environmentalism concerned with protecting nature has inspired global movements. Figures like Greta Thunberg have rallied millions for climate action, while indigenous groups to protect their lands from environmental destruction.
Whether these cultural choices are wholly arbitrary, with none being better than it. But I mean, that's the real issue with cultural relativism.
But whatever you believe about that, there is a fixed basis. There must be a fixed basis. Otherwise, you can't acquire a culture in the first place.
No, but
and that fixed basis has to be determinative, narrowly determinative. Now, that fixed basis gives our actual human moral values. Now, if you raise the question about progress, yeah, I think there is progress. And I think it's valuable to look at our own history. So we're not talking about imperialist conquest. Our own history shows that there is moral progress. And in fact, the very examples that were given strongly illustrate it. Slavery, subjugation of women, repression of homosexuals, all of this was very common, perfectly well accepted in Western culture, not very far back. In the case of, say, Turing, it was 50 years ago. It's now all regarded as completely unacceptable. I think that's evidence. It's not in discussing human affairs, you don't have proofs, we don't understand enough. But I think this is, and there's much more like it, is evidence that somehow, as our own history, culture develops, we penetrate more deeply into our actual, real, cultural and normative values. And we expand the moral sphere in fairly definite ways. These three examples are good illustrations of it.
I'm going to give you a short summary about what relativism is. Relativism is the belief that there's no absolute truth, only the truths that a particular individual or culture happen to believe. If you believe in relativism, then you think different people can have different views about what's moral and immoral, what people should do and what people shouldn't do. Relativism has its own pros and cons. Pros such as cultural understanding. Relativism can help people understand and respect other cultures by encouraging an open mind, meaning encouraging people to have an open mind about certain things, and that no culture is superior to another. It also encourages people to respect the autonomy of other cultures and recognize that people come from different cultures. However, relativism has its own cons too, risk creating chaos if people can justify any actions under their personal moral view, and logically, judgmental proclamations of any kind are meaningless, as well as relativism can create a society where people can pursue their genuine interests. Genuine interest, first thing I could think of when it comes to genuine interest is LGBT, which is scary because we all know that almost half of our generation is involved in LGBT, and not only other religion but Muslims as well. I have an ustaz whose friend lives in London and has a daughter who's involved with LGBT, and the ustaz was then called an extremist just because he told the daughter that that's wrong and it goes against religion, it goes against Islam. That is an example of relativism. She thinks it's right, therefore it's right, and even though it goes against the religion.
أيها الذين آمنوا إن جاءكم فاسق بنبأ فتبينوا أن تصيبوا قوما بجهالة فتصبحوا على ما فعلتم نادمين.
O believers, if an evildoer brings you any news, verify it so you do not harm people unknowingly, becoming regretful for what you have done. This verse shows that we cannot justify someone's words or thinking or perspective on certain thing before much knowledge. To attain the knowledge, we must always refer to the Quran and Sunnah. Those are the only sources we must trust. Yes, Allah has given us akal, intellect, for us humans to think and reason, and to differentiate what's right and what's wrong. Despite that, we shouldn't believe in something strongly before having the knowledge and evidence from our main sources.
To conclude, relativism is an ancient philosophical theory rooted in the ideas of Protagoras of Abdera. It rejects universal truth, asserting that knowledge, morality, and belief depend on cultural, individual, or historical context. This contrasts with absolutism, which claims universal truth, realism, which emphasizes accurate representation of reality, objectivism, which supports individual rights, and rational self-interest, and monism, which believe in a single true perspective. Different branches of relativism reflect this context dependence. Cultural relativism states that moral norms are only valid within specific cultures. Conceptual relativism suggests our understanding is shaped by cultural or individual framework. And moral relativism argues that judgment of right and wrong depend on cultural or personal context. Relativism has been complex and sometimes misunderstood, but it challenged the idea of universal truth by proposing that interpretations vary across cultural and conceptual frameworks.
Well, the consequence of relativism is that in the end we'll each have our own reality. I have my reality, you have your reality. What objective truth says is that there's one you, there's one reality, and truth for me and truth for you are bound to that same reality. And if that's not the case, if we each have our own truth, and therefore we each have our own reality, the consequence of that is that ultimately communication itself becomes impossible. If our words don't have some kind of fixed meaning, then communication becomes impossible. And in fact, we each live in our own worlds, isolated in our own world, not even really able to communicate. In the classical understanding, there's reality. And reality is the measure of truth for me, and the very same reality is the measure of truth for you. How are we going to decide on a meaning of something? If reality doesn't determine the meaning, and we each have our own truths, well then what's the only possibility? If we're going to decide on a meaning, then either I have to make you yield to my meaning, or you have to make me yield to your meaning. There's no arbiter that stands outside of both of us, to which we both have to submit. Either I submit to you, or you submit to me. And there's no way out. There's no way out of that. I think that's why Sartre, in a play entitled No Exit, No Way Out, ends with the famous statement that hell is other people. And if we're all defining our own reality, if truth is relative to each of us, well then, what do we do when we confront the other? We have to make that other yield to our vision of truth, to our vision of reality. But the other's going to do the same to us. And so we're going to be locked in this conflict with the other. Whose vision will win? Whose vision will prevail?
What are you doing?
Sorry, I haven't eaten in 2 days.
Stealing is wrong. No matter what, there are other ways to get help by breaking the law.
But think about it, that she's being reasonable because she hasn't eaten for 2 days. I think it should be fine.
I don't condone stealing, but I can't ignore their situation.
Friend A holds a strict moral view that stealing is always wrong. Friend B sees morality as flexible depending on circumstances. The stock owner tone between the two views shows how personal beliefs can shape our judgment of right and wrong.
Listen, I cannot give you free food without paying, but I can give you any other food and help find resources for help.
I still don't agree, but this is maybe a better solution for her because she hasn't eaten for 2 days, right?
Yeah, and sometimes understanding people's situation is important as sticking to the rules.
Relativism teaches us that moral beliefs can differ based on individual perspectives and cultural contexts. This scene shows how people can have different yet valid interpretations of the same act.